I don't like that Bill Maher can get on national television and say that Islam is the mother lode of bad ideas. It should be the same for both sides. If they can massively criticize Islam, you should be able to massively criticize Judaism. And I said this on Piers Morgan. I don't believe in white supremacy. I don't believe in Jewish supremacy.
I am a Riva and I was taught how to pray Salah.
That means every single time I pray,
the person who told me gets the reward.
5 times a day, from Fajr to Isha.
If you want to support someone like me in learning Salah,
then sponsor 10 people for just £100.
Remember the Prophet, peace be upon him, said,
charity does not decrease wealth. Click the button and donate now.
Assalamu alaikum brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. Dan Bilzerian, in a brand new interview which I've linked in the description, called out the hypocrisy and double standards of certain alternative media personalities when it comes to dehumanizing Muslims, whilst not holding people from other faiths to the same standard, despite their actions often being far worse. In particular, he made reference to Bill Maher and Piers Morgan for their repeated hypocrisy on the Israel-Palestine situation. Let's look at the first clip, where Dan calls out Bill Maher for discriminating against Islam, whilst at the same time promoting Jewish supremacy.
I can't support genocide no matter what. The average American knows how much money we're actually sending over there. We're not getting nothing, we're getting less than nothing, because we're basically pissing off a quarter of the globe, the Muslims.
But you're cool with Jewish people in general.
I think anybody that hates an entire group of people is just stupid. You should judge everybody, on face value. But at the same time, I don't think you should ignore statistics either. I think it's okay to recognize patterns. I don't think there's any group of people that has all bad people. I think just even that idea is nonsense. And that's what I was talking about with dehumanizing populations, which is what we did with Muslims in Iraq. I was in the military. I saw what happens when you dehumanize a population, and you can justify all sorts of super up things. And that's what they're doing in Israel right now. And I don't want to see it done on any side. I don't like that Bill Maher can get on national television and say that Islam is the mother lode of bad ideas. It's just bullshit. And it should be the same for both sides. If they can massively criticize Islam, you should be able to massively criticize Judaism. It should be freedom of speech. I'm a freedom of speech absolutist. There's a big double standard here, and that's what I don't like. When I was in the military, it was, Muslims are sand niggers, they're hajis, they're, whatever. There was words used to talk about Muslims in a way to dehumanize them. And what that allowed the U.S. soldiers to do was kill them and not feel bad about it. There's a million civilians that died in Iraq. People in the military didn't bat an eye. They had words for them. They dehumanized that population. They tried to make them so that you didn't look at them as human. And the problem with doing that is most people are not all good and most people aren't all bad. Most people are gray area.
Everyone's a sinner. Everyone's fallen short of the glory of God. Every single person is flawed and a sinner.
Mohammed were above, but I mean, look, everybody's got their belief system. I think it's important to speak up for these Palestinians that are being killed right now, because they don't really have a voice. And I don't like my tax dollars funding their suffering and their genocide, and Israel cutting off human aid and food and water to mostly civilians, and bombing hospitals and blowing up schools, basically infringing on these people's human rights on a daily basis. They've been doing it for, seriously, for a year and a half. But this has been going on for 77 years or whatever it's been since Nakba. Every time they talk about what's going on in Israel today, they talk about October 7th, but they don't talk about all the events that led up to October 7th and the reason that October 7th happened.
As Dan pointed out, America's funding of Israel isn't just a costly investment that yields no returns. It also alienates a quarter of the world's population, namely Muslims. And when you factor in non-Muslims who also oppose the US footing the bill for Israel's endless wars, that number likely rises to around 3/4 of the global population objecting to the monetization of war crimes. And as Dan emphasised, no racial or religious group can be stereotyped as entirely good or entirely bad, because every background, ethnicity and faith encompasses a mix of both. Also, well done to him for calling out the decades-old discrimination and dehumanization of Muslims, a sinister tactic Dan himself said is used to justify the mistreatment and oppression of innocent people through falsely generalizing them all as villains. We've all witnessed the anti-Islam propaganda he's referring to, whether in politics, mainstream news, movies, or more recently in podcasts and social media posts. Dan made a great point when when he said that bigots like Bill Maher are given free rein on mainstream platforms to spread vile anti-Muslim views, while the same platforms would swiftly cancel anyone expressing similar hatred towards Judaism. I agree with Dan, this is a blatant double standard, and the people in charge of these platforms are clearly complicit in a calculated, malicious and prejudiced political strategy, and it's no coincidence that most major media and social media companies are controlled by Zionists. I respect Dan for giving a voice to the Iraqis and Palestinians that have suffered as a result of these malignant totalitarian agendas, by specifically pointing to the millions of lives lost in Iraq, as well as Israel's ongoing genocide and starvation of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. He's not only highlighting the devastating impact, but also calling attention to tragic injustices that are often deliberately swept under the carpet. And as Dan said, this did not start on October 7, 2023. It started in the 1940s with the Nakba, when Zionists forcibly divided Palestine to carve out the state of Israel, setting in motion decades of displacement, ethnic cleansing and apartheid. Let's watch the next clip where Dan responds to the accusations of anti-Semitism directed at him following his interview with Piers Morgan.
You've faced some pretty intense criticism. Some of the remarks that you made on Piers Morgan's Uncensored. Just to clarify, Dan, what are your beliefs?
Well, I think Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat at the world today. And I said that on national TV. I've said that on my social platforms. I mean, I started speaking out against, the Israeli genocide that we're funding with our tax dollars over a year and a half ago. They've since kicked me off the board of my company illegally. I've lost probably a $700-800 million sale, of which I would have gotten 50% of. So it's been pretty costly to me. My Jewish business manager tried to extort me. My Jewish lawyers fucked me over. I've had a lot of my Jewish friends come out and attack me. So, I've gotten a lot of pushback from that community. And this is coming from a guy that probably more than half my friends were Jewish. And once you criticize Israel, now all of a sudden it's this fucking tribal pack mentality. And for some reason, they've got this allegiance to a foreign country more so than their own. And then you start seeing your politicians tweeting in support of Israel. And then you realize how much of your tax dollars are going to fund this fucking terrorist nation. And you start looking at the history of Israel and how it was founded by terrorists that blew up the King David Hotel. And they, persecuted these Palestinians. They stole their land starting from the Nakba. And it's super fucked up. And they're currently operating in apartheid. They're committing a genocide and we are funding it. And I'm completely against that. And I'm not going to apologize for that. They've labeled me an anti-Semite, this, that, and the other. I really could give a fuck, honestly. I don't give a shit what people, say about me. I don't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. For me, this is not about all Jews are bad. I didn't say that. And I said this on Piers Morgan. I don't believe in white supremacy. I don't believe in Jewish supremacy. I don't believe in black supremacy. I don't believe in supremacy, period. And so the problem is when you don't view other people that aren't of your race or religion as being equal to you, then you have exactly what you have in Palestine today, which is a genocide. And, these people aren't apologizing for it. Israel has such a stranglehold on our politicians that you've got our politicians up there clapping like baby seals for a war criminal. And somehow we just continue to give them, trillions of dollars. I mean, our support of Israel, if you total it all up and you add in, the war on terror, which we fought on their behalf because Netanyahu lied in front of Congress about weapons of mass destruction. So that war was fought for them. It's $20 trillion. So when I start looking at that shit as a veteran, I have real problems. And when I look at their history, I mean, they attacked the U.S. warship. We were their ally at the time. I mean, if you start looking at the history of what these assholes have done, it's inexcusable.
Dan Bilzerian made it explicitly clear that opposing Jewish supremacy does not equate to anti-Semitism. As you saw, Dan claimed that he's been unfairly labelled in this way, simply because he has been one of the most vocal critics of the genocide Israel is committing in Gaza. And as he pointed out, the fact that many of his closest friends and colleagues were Jewish before he was cancelled just further emphasised that he doesn't harbour any hatred towards Jewish people. Piers Morgan certainly played a significant role in Dan Bilzerian being labelled as anti-Semitic, given how Piers continues to portray Dan after their viral interview, despite Dan clearly stating on that show that he is not anti-Semitic. I would argue that Piers Morgan's former pro-Israel stance has caused far more harm than the views expressed by Dan Bilzerian. And with Piers now recognising the error of his ways by ironically taking a similar pro-Palestine stance as Dan, as the world turns against Israel, we've still not heard an apology from him or the likes of Bill Maher for their role in promoting Israel's genocidal propaganda. It says a lot about the depth of Dan Bilzerian's character that despite him losing hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of his support for Palestine, refused to bend to the pressure from the Zionists trying to ruin him financially. And credit to Dan for not only calling out US politicians that shill for Israel, but also Israel's repeated historic extremist attacks on British and American targets. Dan was also spot on in highlighting that the trillions of dollars the US has given to Israel, along with them going to war in Iraq on behalf of Netanyahu, is not only an unnecessary heavy burden on the American people, but also completely inexcusable and unjustifiable. In my opinion, anyone who continues to make excuses for Israel by promoting their anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian and genocidal propaganda is complicit and should be held legally accountable, as they're playing a direct role in enabling the killing of innocent civilians and children. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, and remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah, Jazakallah khair.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah